right, everyone, welcome back to the Power of Progress. Today's amazing guest is Allison Liu, who is a brain health coach and expert in helping women to reclaim their mental sharpness and improve their energy and mood. When she struggled with brain fog, panic attacks, and low mood in her early 50s, she felt that she was losing her sense of self. But that all changed when she adopted a holistic approach to her health, which she uses with her clients today. As a result, she increased her own brain reserve, improving her memory, mood, and relationships. She now coaches women in their 40s and beyond to achieve the same, that they can handle life's challenges with ease and face the future with confidence. Her motto is stay sharp for life. Allison, thank you so much for joining the show today.
Hi, Scott, and thank you so much for the opportunity to join you on this podcast to talk about brain health, which is something I'm so passionate about.
I mean, it's a very interesting topic because I don't think a lot of people even have a remote idea of what it is or why it's so. I mean, people, I guess, understand why it's important for having brain health. They don't understand what we're going to be talking about for the most part. So I think prefacing the conversation of what is a brain health coach, so we understand what we're talking about here, and then we'll kind of get into it.
Okay, so sure. I am, first of all, a qualified health coach. I have done some training with the Institute for Integrative Nutrition. That's a mouthful. And basically, as a health coach, I help clients to improve their health in sustainable ways, developing new habits, identifying blockers that stand in their way, helping them to move forward towards the goals that they have for themselves. But sometimes people actually have trouble following through with new habits when they're trying to improve their health. You know, maybe they lack motivation at times, or they're really easily distracted, or can't stay organized. Maybe they have self-doubts. And all of those things actually point to there being an underlying problem in terms of their brain. And so what I do then as a brain health coach is I help them to get their brain functioning more optimally in order that they can do those other things more easily in their life. So I then specialized in health coaching, looking at the brain. It's the thing I'm the most passionate about. If I can help people to fall in love with their brain, I feel like I've done my job. And so I help them to know the things that they can do to optimize the function of their brain, to help them then follow through on their intentions and achieve the goals that they want for themselves.
I love that you just said getting the brain to function more optimally, and I want to hit on that a lot. But first, I think it'd be important to kind of go through your background a little bit and how you kind of got started, like really got started in this field. I know you have the health coaching license and everything, but your experience, like what happened? How did you get to this particular field?
Well, to be honest, when I was younger, I never thought about my brain. We hear a lot about ways to look after our heart or our skin, but nobody really talks so much about how to look after our brain. So my personal journey, as you say, started a few years ago when I was in my late 40s, early 50s, when I started to notice some changes in my own mental health that were honestly really quite unnerving. So I found that I was making impulsive decisions that were at times worryingly dangerous. And afterwards, I'd be really shaken up and think, how can I ever stop myself from making such an impulsive decision like that again? That was unusual behavior for me. I was becoming increasingly anxious and irritable, again, so unlike me. So by nature, I'm really quite positive, quite energetic, quite a gentle, laid-back person, but I was starting to have panic attacks and would lose my temper over really petty things. So I was worried, honestly, about what people around me were thinking, especially at work. I started to forget what I was saying. I'd be literally right in the middle of saying it and would forget what I was saying. I'd struggle at times to express myself or put my thoughts together. And even at times, I'd have no recollections of certain meetings that had taken place or decisions that had been made. And it's a horrible feeling. It wasn't as though I could tell myself not to make impulsive decisions or to remember what I couldn't recall. I think that's why it's so frightening. It felt like I couldn't control what was happening to me. So around that time, I started to be interested in natural ways to look after our health. I had been on medications earlier in my life, and they'd had side effects that really weren't great, and I didn't like. So I started to learn about various things I could do, and my knowledge and understanding really built from there. And what happened, Scott, actually was amazing. So after a while, I'd look in the mirror and I'd think, my skin looks brighter. And my digestion started to improve. It had always been like really sluggish all my life, but it started to get so much better. And then, honestly, the brain fog lifted. And I can't tell you how amazing it was just to be able to think more clearly again. And over time, my mood started to improve. My memory also started to improve. And the panic attacks like completely stopped. So I would say that I'm genuinely happier, and I feel like I'm back to being myself again. And I know that that's had a real impact on the relationships with those closest to me. So, as I was learning all of these things, I was kind of thinking, there was two things I was thinking. One is, why don't we know this stuff? This has changed my life. And yet I didn't know half of this stuff before. And the other thing that really hit me was, this is really hard to stay on track. So one of the things that I had done in that time was I had intentionally tried to lose some weight. I had read on the World Health Organization website that carrying excess fat around the middle increases the risk of certain female cancers. And at that time, I had a solid ovarian cyst, which was what was making me look into it in the first place. But I kind of thought, oh my goodness, this is me. I had a BMI of over 25, and so I wasn't in a very healthy place to start off with, but I managed to lose weight, and I managed to lose 28 pounds, which is like 14 kilos, and I've never put it back on again. But you see, because I've been through those experiences, it's kind of like I know what it takes to try to stay on track, to the things that really help me to actually successfully lose weight, which I had never been able to do before. And so, yeah, really, for me, I now want to be able to support other women on their journey to improving their health. Yeah.
What would you say? And I appreciate you sharing all that, because it definitely gives us kind of a dive into why you're doing what you're doing and then how you kind of got there. Because I mean, that clearly having panic attacks, forgetting what you're saying, all those different things, like that's, and I feel like a lot of people might do resonate with that. I feel like people do have panic attacks, or they do lose their temper a lot. Can you attribute, was there like one or two things, like when you were doing your research into this, when you're kind of figuring things out, when things started to get better for you, could you attribute like one or two main things that you're like, okay, everyone needs to learn how to do this in order to maybe lower their own anxiety or to lower their temper or to help get rid of that brain fog?
Yeah. So I think for me, some of the medications that I had been on, and then, by the way, I want to preface this really clearly. I'm not saying to people, don't take their medications. Please continue to take your medications. But what I hadn't been aware of at the time was with the certain medications that I was on, that they were actually reducing some of the nutrients that my body was able to absorb. And I have been on anti-acid medication for several years, and quite high dose as well. And unbeknown to me, some really key nutrients actually were I was becoming deficient in. And when I started to address those deficiencies, then that was one of the contributors that helped me to feel quite a bit better. The other thing as well for me, but this is my story, and again, whenever I work with people, I want to understand the things that are impacting them, because we're not all the same. But one of the things that was impacting me, again, that I had no idea, was that I actually had sensitivity to certain foods. And when I took those foods out of my diet, and it was one Lent, one year, and right at the start of Lent, and I'd been learning all this stuff, and I was still feeling awful. And I thought, right, for the period of Lent, which is 6 weeks, I am going to take out certain foods from my diet. Oh, I was so upset. I did not want to do this. I was just like, I don't want to give up some of my favorite foods, and figuring out what to eat for breakfast was just like, it was really hard initially. But about 2 or 3 weeks into that time, that was really when the brain fog lifted. I was like, wow, this is amazing. So when it got to the end of the 6 weeks, I'm thinking to myself, well, heck, I'm not going to go back to eating those things because I feel so much better. Even though I love those things, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a full stop. I'm going to say, for the first 50 years of my life or whatever, I've really enjoyed those foods. Now I'm going to say, okay, they no longer are loving me back. And so therefore, I'm going to put them to one side. And there have been a couple of times in the years since when I've just tried them just a little bit to see, okay, can I tolerate these now? And, some of my symptoms come back. And then I'm like, no, these are obviously not for me anymore. And my health is more important.
Wow. And so and I have a very similar kind of story with that, whereas I was having, and mine was a little bit different. Mine wasn't necessarily brain fog or things like that. Mine was stomach issues related. I had the worst, and I still do have a very sensitive stomach. I can't eat a lot of different foods. And I'm over here as a trainer, as a coach. I eat healthy all the time. Like I'm always doing really well. And I'm like, why am I having so many different types of pain? Like what is going on in my body? And so I did what they call an elimination diets, not necessarily the same thing what you did, but very similar to, I'm going to eliminate a bunch of different foods and see what happens. And I eliminated, XYZ, did all these things. I did a low FODMAP diet specifically for the elimination. And it was within a day. I mean, it was one day I felt a massive difference in how my body was reacting to food. And I didn't even know, I didn't even know these foods could be bad for you. And my specific ones, onions and garlic, they caused havoc on my body to where I felt horrible every day, but I would just live with it. I just thought, oh, well, that's how my body's going to react to just whatever. And then I took them out and within a day, I was like, huh, like something is switched. I'm not feeling as bad. If you don't mind me asking, what foods, is there a specific food that you would think that people would find interesting that you got rid of that you wouldn't think to get rid of?
Well, for me, but again, this isn't necessarily for everybody. And so for some people, these foods are fantastic part of the diet and it's not a problem. But for me, I took out what we would class as the 4 main ones that can cause sensitivities that you just might not be aware of. And so they were gluten, dairy, corn, and soy. And to this day, I still don't eat any of those 4.
So you said gluten, dairy, you say corn?
Yeah, corn and soy. And I think it's because corn and soy is there's so much of it in the diet that's genetically modified, and it just then becomes harder to digest. That's the same really with gluten. People are finding it generally harder and harder to digest gluten, but that's because it's been changed so much from what the grain originally was, and the level of gluten in the grain. And so that's why it's actually causing a lot of gut issues, again, that people aren't aware of.
My gosh. And I'm glad you found that. A lot of people, it's like, what do you do in order to, and that's actually probably another question for you is, what can someone do? They're having some issue. What can they do to start some sort of elimination diet? How do they start that? We're talking about how we've done it and we've gone through these specific protocols. How does someone start that, and what protocol should they follow? Obviously, everyone's a little different, but is there something they can at least start with?
Yeah. Well, I think what I would say is I'm not a nutritionist. I am a coach, and so again, I wouldn't really prescribe any particular diet or even a particular exercise regime. What I would do is help clients to understand what seems to be going on for them, and then to seek the professional help to get maybe some tests, and maybe even a protocol that they can follow to help to address some of those things. So I probably would feel a little bit hesitant
Fair enough.
to give some guidance on that.
Fair enough. Awesome. So what you said at the very beginning, you talked about getting people's brains to function more optimally. What does that mean? And then how are there certain methods that you could use to help them do that? And like, what would people feel once they do it?
Yeah. Well, first of all, what I would say is the brain is amazing. And when you think about it, it's everything that we are. It's how we think, how we feel, how we act and react. So it's the organ of our character, our personality, of our intelligence, the way we connect with those that we love. For some people, the way they connect with God. It's the organ of our memories. And yet we seldom think about it because we can't see it. We're more likely to invest in our skin, the health of our skin. You know, we see wrinkles or we see acne or whatever, and we don't like it, and so we'll do something about it. But we don't really think about our brain. And so what most people as well don't realize is there's a couple of things when it comes to the brain. First, that there is a physical element to mental health. And the next is that actually there's a lot that we can do to influence how our brain functions. So, you know, a lot of people are living in fear of whether they might end up having something like dementia or cognitive decline. And it's almost like not really knowing whether that's just going to come knocking at their door, and living in fear of it, and not having any idea of things that they could do to actually prevent it. And so, but what I would say is when our brain works well, then we are likely to have an improved memory. We're likely to feel happier, to be able to focus, to remember things easily, to be able to handle challenges as well that come our way. But when our brain is not functioning optimally, then we're more likely to struggle. And that's where we start to get memory issues, feeling less able to cope with things, feeling more overwhelmed and anxious.
When you say there's a physical element to your mental health for the most part, or your brain health, are you talking about like exercise? Is that kind of, or what else would you be referring to when you say there's a physical element to it?
Yeah, so when it comes to our brain, I liken it to a computer from the point of view of you've got the hardware of a computer, and then you've got the software. And when the software isn't running properly, then it could be that there's an issue with the hardware, literally the physical functioning of the brain. And, you know, our brain has needs, but as an organ in our body that must be met in order to function optimally. So it needs a balance of nutrients and hormones and brain chemicals called neurotransmitters. And so when we don't have those things, or they're not in the right balance, then literally the brain can struggle to function optimally. So can I give you a couple of examples?
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, so there's a neurotransmitter in the brain called serotonin. And when we have adequate levels of serotonin, then we're able to shift our attention from one thought or action to another. We can go with the flow and adapt to change and deal successfully with new things that come our way. We're better able to cooperate with other people and adapt to different people's personalities. However, when there's not enough serotonin in the brain, people can struggle to shift attention. and they end up stuck on certain thoughts or behaviors. They can have like looping negative thoughts. So if you can imagine a little mouse on a wheel, stuck going round and round and round. And people with this brain type might hear somebody maybe talking about they're going to have a donut. And as soon as they've heard that, they're like, I can't stop thinking about it, you know. And then they just have to have one on the way home. It's like a compulsion. And so they might automatically as well say no to suggestions, because actually they find comfort and like things the way they are. They like things to be predictable. But what that means is that they can then find it really hard to make changes, even those that could improve on their health. And so what would be good to help somebody do in that situation
Please let
is
me know.
actually to increase their serotonin levels in their brain, so that then actually they can find it easier to adapt new lifestyle and habit changes. Yeah, and another one would be dopamine, again, another neurotransmitter. And that really helps people to make really good decisions, to be organized, to plan and then follow through on them, to focus, to control impulses, and to stop themselves from doing or saying inappropriate things. However, again, when there are low levels of that neurotransmitter in the brain, then somebody's more likely to make impulsive decisions. So in that instance, they might see a donut and eat it without even giving it a second thought. They just do it.
Sounds like me. I think I think you're describing me right now. Like, it's kind of a little scary.
Yeah. But you see, they're then more likely to be easily distracted, to procrastinate, to fail to make plans, or even if they did make a plan, they might find it really hard to follow through. So those are just a couple of ways that our brain can affect the decisions that we make. And, you know, as you can see, it's really important not to see ourselves as just weak-willed or lazy or lacking in commitment. Sometimes we just don't have the right chemical balance to help us make those good decisions. However, the good news is that there are things that we can do to support the type of brain that we have.
I think that's such a powerful point to make, is that a lot of the times, at least, you know, in the field I'm in, people they do get down on themselves, right? Why can't I just do this? Why can't I just do this? Or the coaches that they're talking to are like, hey, why can't you just wake up, just do this, just whatever? And we don't realize much, almost all the time, that maybe there is this nutrient chemical imbalance that we need to kind of look at. Not to say that it's an excuse or whatever it might be, but that is a contributing factor to, hey, if you need to increase your serotonin levels because you dwell and you ruminate on certain decisions and you can't stop thinking about certain things, as my hand is raised right here, then maybe we need to find a way to make sure that, you know, your hormones, your neurotransmitters are actually functioning properly. So that brings me to I think it's a balance, right? Because I think that at some point people have to take responsibility for their actions, but at some point we also have to look at our health in a macro and micro perspective and say, okay, are we doing what we can optimally for our health so that we can make and do things that we want to do? And I think those things there's a balance, right? You know, you said if someone does have these dwelling or ruminating thoughts, or they can't stop thinking about something, or they don't like change, you'll increase the serotonin levels. Are you familiar with ways to increase serotonin levels for just the average Jane and Joe? You know, it's like, what can I do today to increase my serotonin levels, if that's something I feel like I can do?
Yeah, for sure. There are a couple of things. So one of the things that's super easy that you can do is to get exercise. Actually, exercise, honestly, if you could put it in a pill or put it in a bottle, it would be worth a fortune
Oh my
in
gosh.
terms of what it does for our health, including our brain. So exercise can boost all of those really good neurotransmitters in our brain. And one of the reasons actually that it affects the serotonin levels is that tryptophan, which is an amino acid that's needed, it's like the building block for serotonin, is like really small. And so in terms of fighting to get into the brain, it has to fight against some like really big amino acids, and it often loses out. And you'll be interested to know that SSRIs, which are used as antidepressants, they are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So basically, what they're trying to do is keep serotonin in the brain and not let it get metabolized and taken away. So, so how exercise helps is that when we're exercising, we're working our muscles, the big amino acids then go to our muscles in order to help us to exercise. Meanwhile, it then allows that little tryptophan to get into the brain. And that's why it causes, you know, you can have like the runner's high. So when people do their running and it makes them feel so good, it's because it's boosted the serotonin in their brain. So that's certainly one thing that you could do. Another thing is there are some foods. So basically, again, tryptophan being an amino acid, there are certain foods that contain tryptophan. So that's eggs, turkey, seafood, chickpeas, nuts, seeds. So when we eat those, but again, we've kind of got to get them into the brain. And one of the ways to do that is by eating what I would term smart carbohydrates. So, you know, we want to kind of ditch the refined carbohydrates because they're just not good for us. But having things like sweet potatoes, quinoa, beans again, what they then do is they will elicit like a short-term release of insulin, and that then helps to get the tryptophan into the brain. Another little tip and hint is that dark chocolate also raises both serotonin and dopamine.
What kind of dark chocolate?
With really high sugar, dark. So you're looking at about 85%.
85%? Oof, that is some bitter dark. I'm gonna start. I do like dark chocolate, so I'm usually right around that 75% though. So I'll have to bump it up then to get some more more serotonin.
You just actually have to be really careful with dark chocolate because some of them can have phenomenally high levels of sugar. But yeah, well, a good one.
And actually, that's a great segue. So we're talking about the hormones. We're talking about different foods to eat. So, you know, we know that food affects the brain. We know that we want to to work optimally. What does sugars affect on the brain? Obviously, you know, healthy foods have sugar. I'm more so talking about processed sugar and added sugar. What does that affect on the brain, and how can we, notice that it's happening to us?
Yeah, sugar actually has a massive impact on the brain. So an example of how our body affects our brain actually is to do with weight gain, and especially carrying that excess weight around the middle. So generally people don't like having a bulge because it makes them feel uncomfortable and they don't like how it looks. But actually what people don't realize is that excess fat around the middle actually is metabolically active and it produces hormones. And one of the things it does is it converts healthy testosterone and converts it into the most unhealthy cancer-promoting form of estrogen. And it'll do that in both men and in women. And this isn't great because testosterone protects the nervous system and helps to prevent cognitive decline in both men and women. But the problem is that most people still believe that eating a low-fat diet is healthy. And as a result, they've been eating too much carbohydrates. So take breakfast, for example. People typically might have a bowl of cereal, a slice of toast and jam, and a glass of orange juice, which is actually very high carbohydrate way to start the day. So what this then leads to is a blood sugar spike, followed by a crash mid-morning, which makes them feel anxious. They then have to panic to eat something high in sugar again, which causes another spike, followed by a crash, and there the day goes on. And meanwhile, in this scenario, their body is trying desperately hard to actually cope and deal with the excess blood sugar. So insulin has two functions. One is to get glucose into cells, it has like this lock and key function on cells. And so it opens up the cell in order to get the glucose into cells, but it has another function, and that is that it's the fat storing hormone. And it does its job really well in this scenario. So it then takes the glucose that the cells don't need. They've got quite enough, thank you. And so what it does is it puts it into fat. And where does it store it? Right around the middle, where the liver then can easily convert it back into glucose during lean times when food is scarce. But the problem is that nowadays food is never scarce. So the weight just keeps going on. And so over time as well, the cells gradually stop responding to the insulin because the body is pumping out so much insulin. The cells go, oh my goodness, we've got enough glucose. There's too much glucose going on in this body. And what it starts to do is actually kind of switch off. It down regulates those insulin receptors on the cells. And over time, it does that more and more and more until the cells stop responding to the insulin. And that's when things start to get particularly damaging for the brain. Because it's the most energy hungry organ in the body. So while it's only 2% on average of the body's weight, it needs about 20% of the body's blood flow and oxygen, and 20 to 30% of the body's glucose. So when the cells stop responding to insulin, the brain struggles to get the energy that it needs. And we now know that diabetes increases the risk for Alzheimer's disease by 50 to 60%. If I put it another way, approximately 60 to 70% of people with type 2 diabetes will go on to develop Alzheimer's disease in comparison with 10% of the general population. That's a staggering statistic. And the link is so strong that in research circles, Alzheimer's disease is often referred to as type 3 diabetes. So if there is one thing I would really encourage people to do is to become sugar aware. How much are they having in their diet? And look at what can they do to pull back on how much sugar they're eating and to try to really get their blood sugar under control.
I think there's and I know we're not nutritionists here, so I don't want to get too deep into that, but I think there's a confusion in at least Western society on what sugar is and how to actually not eat as much. A lot of people say, okay, I won't have the refined sugar, but I will just eat a bunch of fruit. And they'll think, okay, well, I'm being healthy because I'm eating fruit. Can you still get the same effects by eating a bunch of fruit? I mean, if you have an apple, a banana, and an orange every single day, that is a lot of sugar. It might be natural and not processed, but you're still consuming probably upwards of 50 grams of sugar on just those three things alone. And what does that have a similar effect, even though it's quote unquote a healthier food with other nutrients? Should people still be aware of, hey, it's still sugar at the end of the day? Yes, you can have more of that because there's healthier nutrients coming from it, and it's not a Twinkie bar. But you still got to be aware of it. You can't have. I think the recommendation by the FDA in the U.S. is it's like 25 grams or whatever it is. Oh, no, sorry, two cups of fruit a day. That's what I'm looking at. 2 cups of fruit a day, and that's it because of the sugar intake of the fruit that you're going to have. So should they be careful of high sugar fruits as well?
Yeah. So what I would say is, in the UK, the National Health Service, the NHS, recommends eating no more than 30 grams of added sugar a day. So it's similar. Some countries are around 25 grams of sugar.
Yeah, we're similar.
But on average, the average Brit has about 100 grams of sugar a day. And most people are going to think, there's no way I'm eating 100 grams of sugar a day. But the key thing I think is really important for people to understand is that there are so many hidden sugars in processed foods that people are eating that they're really unaware of. So I have a sugar fast challenge that I can encourage people to do. And in it, I get people to like go to a restaurant or a cafe, and so you can do it online, pick a menu and find the item on the menu with the highest sugar. And you will be amazed to learn what some of those things are. So let's say, for example, there's one cafe chain where their what's it called? Their raisin loaf toast, yeah, is their highest food item on their menu in terms of sugar. And yet most people would think actually that would be a better option to eat than having like a cake or a muffin. And so it's really important to start looking at labels and menus, even things like healthy bars can be packed with sugars. And food manufacturers as well, what they're doing is instead of having sugar as the main item, they're kind of splitting it into various different sugars. So anything ending in O, so glucose, sucrose, dextrose, anything like that, that's going to be sugar. And start taking a look. Take a look at the daily value. On a breakfast bar, you can eat about a quarter of your daily value of sugar just in that one bar. And so I hear what you're saying about fruit, but I think that people have even got where they're starting from could be so much further away in a sense from that.
Okay.
That I would really encourage them first to look at what hidden sugars are they eating that they're not even aware of. And then the next one I would look at actually is how much sugar are people drinking. So, whether it's they're adding sugar to their tea or coffee, or things like
Coca-Cola, Pepsi. Yeah. I mean, oh my God. I mean, one 12-ounce can. I mean,
exactly.
A lot.
Exactly. One can of Coke, I believe, is about 45 grams of sugar. That's
Give or
one can of
take.
Coke, and yeah, that's right. And you've gone over your entire daily allowance of sugar. So yeah, just becoming really sugar aware, trying not to drink it, and yeah, reading labels, become a label reader. The one thing I would say on fruit is I do believe that fruit is really healthy. I think it can give us nutrients and fiber and phytonutrients. These really, really good things. Blueberries and raspberries are fantastic. I think you're right in terms of not going overkill. But as well, the other thing I would say is try not to juice it. So don't have like orange juice, apple juice, that kind of thing, because by the time it's a juice, the sugars are completely extracted from all of the fiber, and it's honestly it's like drinking a soda. So that's one thing I would say.
Oh no, it's a great thought. And yeah, you're right. I got ahead of myself. It's one of those things where it's like, let's start at the worst of the worst, and then let's work our way in. So if you're already at the point of not eating processed foods or not eating added sugars and you're eating a lot of fruit, that's a lot better than where you could have been before. And so, but that's a great point. And obviously I'm a huge fan of not drinking any. If you could avoid drinking any sugar, I think that's a very big help, especially fruit juice, which people think is healthy because it's called fruit juice, but it's just sugar. It's just sugar. It's not the same thing as eating fruit at all. I love that. I think it's important for people to know that because like we're fooled into thinking because of labeling and ambiguous terms of, oh, this has to be healthy because it's apple juice. It's like, well, no, it's not, because this whole process is refined, all those different things. So I want to get into, how does our brain, and we talked about this a little bit, but beyond the obvious, right? Obviously, we think a certain way, but we want to talk about how our brain affects the choices that we make. So we talked about this a little bit. I'm wondering if we can hit a little deeper. And I know we talked about serotonin and dopamine, but was there anything in terms of general health markers that the brain would affect the choices that we make? So if we're having a lot of sugar, right, will that lead us to do certain things versus if we're having, not all that sugar and stuff like that? Is there a way to kind of see, okay, if you're having all this sugar, you're more likely to sit on the couch all day long versus not having all this, you'll be more productive. Is there anything like that or any correlations that you've
Yeah.
seen in your practice?
Yeah, no, definitely. So you remember I spoke a minute ago about serotonin and
Yeah.
dopamine. And if you can imagine that they kind of need to be like a seesaw, and they need to be in balance. And what happens is if any one of them goes up too high, the other one goes down, and vice versa. And so with serotonin, remember I had said that actually when we eat carbohydrates, it can help to get that tryptophan, that amino acid, into the brain. Well, when serotonin is high, really high, you kind of go into the don't worry, be happy kind of mode. And actually, that's when you're more likely going to find it really hard to focus, to follow through, to be motivated, to actually do the thing that you had planned to do because your serotonin has shot up too high. Again, it kind of hijacks your brain. But likewise, the other way around, if serotonin goes down too low and dopamine goes too high, what happens then is that you fixate on things, and you get those rotating negative thoughts where you just can't, you're stuck and you just can't move forward, and everything feels like it's all you can't make it work and you can't move forward, and and end up in that really negative place. And so yeah, it really is a case of trying to keep those two in balance and not doing too much of any one thing or the other. If you go back to my example as well earlier of breakfast, if you're somebody who is more likely to be a bit stuck, then actually making sure to have some carbohydrates in your breakfast is really helpful. But if you're somebody who like starts the day or you find that you kind of flit during the day from one thing to the next and find it really hard to focus and distracted, and then actually you really don't want to have too much carbohydrate for breakfast, and having something like an omelette or eggs and beans, or beans and wholemeal toast, or a low sugar muesli with Greek yogurt with lots of nuts and seeds, a higher protein breakfast is actually going to serve you better and help you concentrate. I do find it really quite a challenge when my sister's a teacher, and she tells me how sometimes the children in the class are literally, they're like bouncing off the walls. They cannot sit still, they can't focus, they can't concentrate. And you kind of think actually it could well be down largely to the kind of breakfast that they've had before they've come into school.
Yeah.
And there we are, sending these children into school to learn, and they don't stand a chance because their brain's been hijacked.
And it's a powerful point. And I think the same will be true if when you have a bad meal for lunch and then they have no energy because their insulin shot up and then went down, and now they're just like dragging. And that's why after lunch it's like this drag. And yeah, not just school and work and everything. Like that's why you have no energy. You want to go home. You can't concentrate. You're not focused. All those different things. You and I spoke sorry.
I was going to say that's a really good point as well, because actually a lot of processed foods are really quite nutritionally deficient. And so if somebody's diet is very heavy on processed foods as well, they could just not be getting the nutrients that they need. Things like, the B vitamins and A, and, all of those really good vitamins, C and E and magnesium and potassium, and all of those things that our bodies and our brain needs to function well. If they're on a diet that's really quite poor nutritionally, then no wonder their brain is finding it hard to function optimally.
And I think from maybe from a cultural standpoint, it's so difficult for anyone to realize the importance of what you're putting in your body, but barring the extremes on both ends, right? Everyone understands greens are good for you. Everyone understands that donuts are bad. They get that. But I think where a lot of people miss the boat, and what we're trying to educate people, we're trying to show people, is you can't see the internal process going on in your body. And that's what makes it so difficult. You don't see, when you pick up that cookie, what's actually happening in your body. And then you don't connect in 5 hours from now why you're so lethargic, why you're so tired, why you're having negative thoughts. And you don't make those connections because you don't understand the dopamine, the serotonin, all the hormones reacting, and the estrogen, the testosterone, all these different things play such a daily factor. And it's like, man, I don't understand why I can't sleep. It's like, well, you did X, Y, and Z before bed. Like, we don't make these associations because I think we can't see it. I think we don't understand because we can't physically hold it, and we can't hold these hormones in our hand and say, oh, this is what this looks like. I think that is one of the biggest issues that we face, is that we can't see it. So therefore we kind of live our lives and go, well, I guess this is just the way it is now. I guess I just always feel this way. I guess that I'll just compromise this and I'll just live this way. And that's the hard part, is how do we get people to start to open their eyes to, because people have those life stressors, right? They're living paycheck to paycheck. They got 3 kids they got to deal with. They got sports. They got this. It is significantly easier to go and buy fast food real quick for 5 minutes than it is to cook a dinner for 40 minutes. And then they don't have the energy. And then, so it's hard because we understand the benefits of it, but how do we get people to get on that same page when they cannot see the effects that it's having on them? Because our bodies are so great at compromising and so great at kind of making it work that we don't see the consequences until we're in our 70s, 80s, and 90s, when we can't move, we can't function properly.
It's so true. I think we tend to have a really simplistic view of our bodies. And I think partially because of the way that the health system is set up. So if we've got a heart problem, you go to a cardiologist. If we've got a gut issue, you go to a gastroenterologist. Mm-hmm. And we tend to adopt the same mindset. It's like we view our body a bit like a car. When a car breaks down, we take it to a garage, the mechanic fixes it, and everything's great again. It doesn't really matter how well we look after the car, because there's somebody who's going to fix it. And I think we can have a little bit the same approach with our health. We think it doesn't matter in a sense what we do, and that could be subconscious. People aren't intentionally thinking this, because at the end of the day, there's a doctor and there are some medicines that will fix us when something goes wrong. But you're absolutely right that it's so important to understand that there's a fundamental difference between a car and our bodies. If a clutch breaks on a car, then the car doesn't work until it's fixed, and that's really simple. Mm-hmm. However, our bodies are way more complex, and our bodies are more like an ecosystem. And so they will always try to find what's called homeostasis, or balance. They're trying to keep us alive. And so they will always compensate, like you say. So let's just say, for example, for someone living with chronic stress, their body is constantly amped with the stress hormones that are being produced. So making everything in their body work faster. So the thyroid, which is responsible for regulating our metabolism, gets the message, hang on a minute, there's way too much going on here. And so it pulls back on the production of the thyroid hormones in response. And that's just one example of many. So, I would really encourage people to, as well, just view their bodies as these, and brain, as amazing, amazing things that they are. We are amazingly made. And then to kind of take a look and not try to change everything at once, because it's just too overwhelming and it's too much. But what things can they do where it's a really small change, but it's manageable? So one of the things, again, that I encourage people to do is to have a little list every week of how many fresh fruit and vegetables, nuts and seeds they eat. Just that. And every week, think about and looking at the variety and the color, all of that. So the numbers of different types of each one of those that they eat. And then each week, see if they can just increase it by 1 or 2. And make sure to make a note each week of all the different kinds that they're having. And actually, when you make really gradual changes like that, and you realize, oh, do you know, if I have a salad and I've got all these various different things in it, whew, you know, I've actually just eaten like 6 or 7 vegetables in one meal. And actually, it then starts to feel more manageable. And yeah, so that's what I would encourage people to do.
What I want to be mindful of your time and everything, so I do want to get to this one. We spoke about this offline. There are 11 factors that affect the brain. Are you able to speak about a handful? I'm assuming like serotonin and dopamine are part of that 11. We talked about 2 of them. What are some other ones that affect the brain that we haven't really spoken about?
Yeah. So you're right, you know, sugar, we've covered that. We've covered the imbalance in hormones, blood flow. So again, I had said that the brain takes about 20% of the oxygen, the body's blood flow and oxygen. And so, you know, having high blood pressure or high bad cholesterol or hardening of the arteries, all of those kind of things are actually harmful to the brain because the brain can't get the blood that it needs. So, you know, making sure to get lots of exercise, even if it's a walk, you know, you don't have to learn to run marathons. Just, you know, getting a walk every day, fantastic. Keeping learning is again really good. Your brain's a muscle and you need to work it in the same way as you do your muscles. And learning new things is one of the best ways to do that. There is a connection between chronic inflammation and brain health, and people often don't realize that. So, you know, if they're struggling with something like Crohn's disease, rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, all of those chronic inflammatory conditions, it can actually impact the brain as well. Looking at things like toxins, so heavy metals shouldn't be in our brain, and yet, you know, people can have levels of lead, of mercury, aluminium. You know, there are some chemicals in products that we use on our skin, you know, personal care products that can be hormone disruptors. So, you know, things that we can do then to reduce our risk of exposure to toxins and then helping our body to detoxify. Making sure that we've got a lovely, strong immune system to protect us from infections. You know, if anybody's struggling with like long COVID, they will know the impact that an infection can, lasting longer, the impact an infection can have. So just making sure to have a lovely, strong immune system, optimal levels of vitamin D. And then finally, sleep. Sleep is just so important. Whilst we sleep, something amazing happens. Basically, our brain is floating in cerebrospinal fluid, and when we sleep, that fluid washes through the brain, gives it a wash, in order to take away any like dead cells that have accumulated during the day and any toxins to get rid of. And yeah, but it only does that while we're asleep. And so if people are struggling with sleep, then actually their brain isn't getting the wash that it needs. Yeah.
And I love that you brought up sleep because I just bought the Oura Ring to help track my sleep and kind of see where it's going. So I'm going to report back on that one as well once we go through it, because I'm a big fan of sleep. I think sleep is underrated. I think people need better sleep, more sleep. And it used to be the cool thing of like, oh, I only sleep 4 hours a night. I'm like, that sounds miserable. I would rather sleep 9 and be okay with that every single day. So big fan of sleep. So the 11 factors that affect the brain, and we talked about immune system, you know, dopamine, serotonin, all these different things. Are there specific habits that you have seen that generally help these factors more than other things, and that people could start doing today just to start improving their bodies and their physical well-being?
Well, yeah, and you know, I don't, in a sense, want to harp on too much about this, but actually, sugar impacts on several of those. So of those 11 risk factors, a diet high in sugar and refined carbs, it upsets the gut microbiome, and 70% of our immune system is in our guts. So we want to have a really healthy gut microbiome. It lowers our immunity, increases inflammation in the body, causes an imbalance in hormones, causes hardening of the arteries, therefore restricting blood flow to the brain, and can disturb our sleep when people get a sugar low in the night. You know how we can get those lows during the day? Well, when you get a sugar low in the night, you get waking up and find it hard to fall back asleep again. So actually, one of my tips would be, if somebody wants to prevent cognitive decline as they age, really need to get a bit of a control of their weight, especially their blood sugar. Yeah,
Good to
really
know.
important.
I love that. Good, and I've been preaching that for years, so it's good to hear that that's still one of the things we can do. What would be one sign or two signs that someone, you know, might come to you, or it's like, hey, there, you need to make a change. Like you don't even realize that this is going on, but we can see it. What is a sign that's like, I need to make a change in what I'm doing? Because some people just listen to us say, I'm fine, whatever. Who cares? What is a sign or two people can look out for in their lives that's like, I need to make a change?
Yeah. So the first I would say is the one that a lot of people are aware of, is memory issues or brain fog. So that would include things like noticing that your memory is not as good as it was 10 years ago, or you more easily misplace things, or maybe even finding them in unusual places. Having trouble remembering names or missing appointments. Another one is reading a book or an article and not being able to remember much of it, forgetting to take medication, those kinds of things, relying more on memory aids. So the next one would be having trouble planning and problem solving. So making plans and sticking to them, finding it hard even to follow something with lots of directions. So whether it's assembling something or a recipe, finding it hard to focus on more complex tasks, especially if maths is involved. Another sign would be struggling with words, which could include having trouble finding the right word or calling things by the wrong name, having difficulty following along in conversation, or
Wow.
feeling like you just don't want to be too engaged in conversation.
That's just me normally, though. I don't know.
Yes, well, some of us are introverts, absolutely. But it's where you notice that it's a shift, it's a change in how it will normally be for you. Being impulsive is another one that we mentioned before, and socially withdrawing, again, in a way that's out of character, or finding that you're less interested in things that you used to find fun or really enjoy. So those are some things to really be aware of.
I mean, that's amazing. I mean, those are all things that could indicate, hey, you might need to take a look at what's going on in your, basically your microbiome and in your body's ecosystem to see, hey, is there something that's in balance causing these things versus it being normal for you to feel a certain way? And I think that's kind of that shift we got to get people to start making, is like, hey, this might not be normal. Your body might be compensating, and you might need to take a look at what you're eating, what you're doing, because how you're feeling and how you're thinking might not be normal. And I think that's a really strong piece. And all those signs you gave, that's got to be happening to a lot of people. And so they got to be taking a look. Okay, you're right. Like, I'm a lot less interested in these conversations, or I can't remember what I read in this book 2 minutes ago. Like, and we just ignore it. Well, maybe you don't ignore it. Maybe if you actually look at it, you might be able to find out, oh, wow, I need to do X, Y, and Z, and I'll start remembering things again. So I think those are some amazing points to bring up for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of stigma as well around both mental health, as well as memory issues. And you're right, memory problems are common, but they're not normal. And so, I would encourage people not to dismiss the things that they see. There's plenty that we can do to, help boost our brain reserve, as it were, and put our brain into a better place. But I would encourage people, it won't just happen. they have to be intentional about it, and to take action and do something.
100%. Allison, I can go for another 10 hours on this. There's so much more I can get to, but I do want to be aware of the time. Where can people find you? And if they want to get in contact with you and maybe even start something with coaching, like where can they find you?
Yeah. So first thing I would say is if anyone is struggling with their mental health, it is essential to seek help from a skilled mental health professional. But alongside that, they can also adopt healthier dietary and lifestyle habits that can protect their brain. So if any of your listeners want inspiration and support on their journey to a healthier, happier, less stressed brain, then I really would invite them to book a call with me or to sign up for my emails by going to AllisonLiuCoaching.com. And that's Allison with 2 L's, Liu coaching. And if they do decide that they'd like to book a call with me, they can just enter in the code TPP for the Power of Progress 23, and they'll get a free coaching session with me. And if they think that it makes sense to work together afterwards, then we can talk about that later. But what I really want to make sure is that having got onto that call with me, they have a session that really helps them move towards the outcome that they want for themselves. So I would say to your listeners that they're not stuck with the brain that they have. They really can make it better, and it would be a privilege to support them on that journey. I'd love to connect with them.
Awesome. And all that information will be in the show notes. Don't forget the code TPP23. All right, perfect. In there. So I'll put all that in the show notes for everyone there who's interested in potentially coaching with Allison there. And then any final thoughts before we sign off today?
Well, Scott, it really has been such a pleasure. Thank you so much. I think you're providing an amazing resource with the Power of Progress podcast. And I love what you're doing in empowering people to live healthier lives. In closing, I would just say, if people ask themselves this one question as they go through the day, is what I'm going to do good for my brain, or is it bad for my brain? And just take a pause and a moment to think about whether they're going to actually do the thing. If it's not going to be good for their brain, ask themselves, is this thing going to be good for my brain or bad for my brain?
I love it. Great way to lead the show. Allison, I appreciate your time and thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thank you so much for the opportunity, Scott. Bye-bye.